Well, the last panel of the day. Hope you guys are feeling better than me. I just flew in last night. I had crazy jet lag, but I'm going to do my best. So I guess we can start out with some intros. I guess we'll start with Misha.
Thank you. Thanks. My name is Misha. I'm the co-founder of Liquorice. So we're doing a unification layer between the solvers, market makers, and LP providers. And so that's part of also the intent infrastructure, and that's why I'm here.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for having me. My name is Erick Watson. I'm the CEO of Randamu, and we are making dApps dependable by focusing on the execution layer, sort of complementary to what Misha was saying.
Hey, everyone. I am Tanay. I work as a researcher at Propellerheads. At Propellerheads, we are building tools and products to decentralize the trade supply chain. I'm really excited to be on the stage with you guys. I'm looking forward to a fun discussion.
Cool. And I'm Mike, co-founder of Nomial. We're building inventory access layer for solvers. So start with a simple question, often debated. The definition of intents, the definition of solvers. What do you guys think? And maybe add to that, how does it relate to your project? Like how do you guys interface with solvers? How do you interface with intents?
Yeah, I think I can begin answering this question. So from my experience, I think that intents appeared basically last year as the definition. So, but the idea was actually long before, and it came from the TradFi. I think once the infrastructure and the crypto market is actually maturing, so we started finally to separate the intent from execution. So that's something that existed many years before in traditional finance, but in crypto it used to be the same thing. When you post a transaction on chain, it's actually exactly intent and the execution. So now we realize that with MEV problems, with a lot of like actors trying to benefit on that, it's not a very good idea to like unify intent of execution and execution itself. And that's why for me intents is something that expresses the will, but is executed by the specific entities like solvers who are actually better off understanding the realities of on-chain infrastructure that we have on hand today.
Yeah, just building on what Misha said, I think in addition to making it easier for users to express what they're interested in, it also makes it easier for us in that separation layer, as Misha was describing, to figure out who is the best group of solvers to solve a given problem. And so we've been working at Randamu on an execution layer that allows us to accommodate multiple different kinds of solvers so that we're not just solving the same problem over and over again, as we often hear, for example, like swaps. We've heard a lot about swaps today. And I think the promise of intents is much greater than just figuring out how we can convert Bitcoin to Ethereum and vice versa. It actually can lead us into a much richer discussion around things like artificial intelligence, how we get results from our computation, and what kind of life we live. So we're very excited about implementing intents in our execution framework and allowing many different kinds of solvers to solve different types of problems for users.
Yeah, I think I agree with the definitions you all laid out. Simply put, the way I think about intents, it's a set of constraints on a desired state that the user wants the chain to kind of transition to. And as far as what solvers are a set of entities you outsource this execution of state transition to. And yeah, that's pretty much it. What we at Propellerheads think about is this entire trade supply chain, which encompasses the UI all the way to the proposal level. User expresses an intent using the interface. It then propagates, morphs into a transaction, and then gets settled on chain. What we think about is there are a lot of elements in this entire trade supply chain which are centralized, and we are focusing on building infrastructure which involves catering to a lot of solvers to kind of then decentralize parts of this supply chain, so to speak.
Cool. So you mentioned, going beyond just swaps for intents. I guess right now we have this distinction that's not talked about a lot, but everybody says intents. And sometimes it refers to kind of single chain execution systems. Like I view Uniswap X says this. or cow swap. But then also intents are used to refer to cross-chain, and that could be value transfer or swap. So we have these two systems. Like, what do you guys see as, like, I guess, the current state of intents and the current market, and where things will be going? Like right now we have single chain swaps, we have cross chain transfer. It's pretty basic, I think, and I know a lot of folks are building interesting things outside of these. So how do you guys see these systems evolving? Yeah, and anybody can start. Maybe we'll start on this side to switch it up. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm happy to. So I expect a very basic convergence of the two systems. Single chain, cross chain, all are these abstractions which also will converge into one. What matters to the end user is just getting a great price on their swap. And I agree that there are like longer and more imaginative use cases beyond just swaps. As far as these intent OFAs go, I expect them to not only converge, but also then see a mixture of different DeFi primitives also coming together. For example, we can see lending and spot trading converge in some unique ways that weren't possible before. These are kind of the innovations which can improve capital efficiency across the supply chain. And you have mentioned where they are today. Well, today they are focused on some for example, for a solver today, they need to focus on more infrastructure-related developments, and not necessarily trying to focus on how to improve the creativity of their algorithm. So these OFAs incentivize a lot of infrastructure developments, but that's not what we would want to be kind of optimizing for. So some of the work that we are doing, we are trying to open source a lot of these infrastructures, related components for solvers, so that they can focus on purely figuring out how to give better execution. So yeah, convergence and then seeing different DeFi primitives composed together is what I see as like a gradual next step.
Yeah, I think just to build on what was said, I think it's super, super early. We just have the most basic capabilities today, and we're just beginning to scratch the surface of what intents can offer. It makes sense to me that some people would want to focus on a single chain, or others may want to focus on cross-chain bridging, depending on what their specialty is and what their expertise is in. So that's kind of to be expected. But I don't think that it's going to stay that way for very long. I think that there's going to be a lot more cross-chain, more complex compositions that come together as these primitives get better understood and better defined. One of the things that I think we're really missing today is any sort of common, someone mentioned it in an earlier presentation, a common standard, right? Like I think there was a debate as to whether or not somebody goes and sets that standard first and then we back into it, or whether we create a standard together and then write to it. But regardless of how the standard gets arrived at, we're missing those standards. And so if I want to use intents outside of swaps, into something more complex, like something simple like booking travel to Thailand from your home. Imagine you wanted to go to an AI agent and say, I want to book a ticket to Thailand, but it has to leave between these dates and it has to be less than this amount of money. How do you build those constraints, and how do you have sort of a domain-specific language to communicate that desire across these very complex heterogeneous systems? And so I think that's the next big hurdle that we have to overcome, which is candidly what we're working on right now at Randamu, to try to figure out, do we need a domain-specific language? Is there an easier way to do it? Can we use something more primitive and then sort of compose from there? So those are some of the challenges we're trying to overcome in order to unlock the promise of intents.
Yeah, from my side, I think I can only talk about the trading and what happened in there. And we clearly see that intents are picking up. I mean, the trading volume is actually growing quite substantially. And I think that the main point I'm trying to say is that people are actually more and more leaning towards using intent systems because they are providing better execution. And we can see that a lot of this toxic trading flow, it actually stays within the AMMs, and it actually eats some kind of a profits from LP providers. So I would rather to imagine intents going to the LP side as well. And that's something that I think is also interesting development vector for the intents, in my opinion.
Cool. Yeah, that's a good segue to my next question, which is a pretty general question, but one that I get asked a lot, which is just how do users benefit from these systems? Like what actually is better about intents? Like you mentioned better execution and kind of avoiding this toxic order flow, like MEV resistance, et cetera. But what do you see as like the main benefits and why users should use intents? And one follow up to that question is like what does the experience look like? Are users like opting into intents, or do these systems just kind of get baked into like existing products and wallets and apps? Or yeah.
It's a good question. I think that actually CowSwap and Uniswap and OneInch Fusion, they're doing a great job here because they are actually hiding all this complexity behind their walls, and just solvers are doing their job to make it happen. But for the user, it's kind of becoming more and more smooth. So I think that intents are actually helping a lot in that direction. So it's kind of a simplification of the UX interface. So you can do easily things that might be a little bit complicated before. Like previously, you have to do a lot of actions. You have to make sure that you're not front run. So you're like, so it was really for the pros. So today, I think that intents are actually simplifying the UX. So that's one of the biggest things. So execution quality is also kind of on the table, but still it makes easier and easier for users to get what they want because of the intents. So that's my point.
Like one component that I would like to add to what you said, I think it's relatively under discussed, but what should also be focused on is how intents flipped the incentives in the supply chain. Previously, where there were entities like searchers that were incentivized to exploit the user by giving, like, they make more money the worse execution the user gets, whereas when you flip the game with intents, a solver makes more money the more, the improved execution the user gets. So I think this incentive reallocation that has happened is quite impressive, and it's not just going to stay limited to users and solvers, but we will see it trickle down between apps and users as well. And that's something that I'm quite excited about, which is this incentive realignment.
Yeah, I think, Mike, to answer your question, I think we'll know we've arrived when users don't have to think about any of these problems. And one of the examples I can cite is one of our community members is working on an ability to basically send crypto to anyone just based on solely their email address, without that person having to have a wallet, for that matter. So imagine if you could just type in someone's email address and say, "Hey, Grandma, I want to send you half a Bitcoin, and happy birthday," or whatever, and have that actually occur. And someone like one of your grandparents, for example, could pick that up and go, "Oh, look, there's half a Bitcoin in my bank account. How awesome is that?" And that person didn't have to set up. And I kind of a little bit tongue in cheek using my grandmother, but if it's something that your children or your grandparents can't use, it's too complicated, right? So ideally, we'd like to make this intents to be so powerful that none of the complexity that we normally deal with in our everyday lives as crypto developers bleeds through to the user experience. And so whether they still have wallets or not, it's kind of depends on the use case, I suppose. But at the end of the day, we want users to get the value as quickly as possible without having to navigate some sort of maze to figure out how they get to that benefit.
Right. And one of the complexities that definitely goes beyond kind of end users or especially users outside of Web3 right now is just navigating this like multi-chain thing. I mean, us as like, savvy crypto users, we're doing that, but it's painful. So, a lot of folks are talking about chain abstraction. This is Chain Abstraction Day. How do intents relate to chain abstraction? How does it help us get closer to that goal of kind of abstracting this multi-chain experience?
I think the simple answer is it really depends on what value those chains bring to that use case. And so what I think we'll see is maybe things will get worse before they get better, in the sense there'll be more fragmentation. So some use cases will only occur on certain blockchains. And in those situations, the ability to execute against an intent is very straightforward. Like, for example, we talked about CowSwap. I'm just swapping between two different cryptos. I don't really care I don't want to see all the details underneath. I just want the best execution, right? But we're starting to see, particularly in the L2 space, a lot of differentiation among the different L2s as they try to separate themselves from the pack, right? And provide a little bit more specialization. And so as those use cases become more mature, I think you'll see things like, and I'm just going to make this up, but for example, all new video games are now built on Arbitrum instead of on some other L2, for example. And that's just, I realize some people would take that as a threat, you know. So I don't want to offend anybody. It's just an example, right? Yeah, but as these chains get more specialized, I think we'll start to see a sort of sorting out, if you will, based on use case.
You guys want to comment on chain abstraction and intents together? Like how do intents help us get to chain abstraction?
To me, they are two sides of the same coin. Chain abstraction represents a vision for the end of what the UX looks like, and I think intents are the mode of transport to help us realize that UX. Yeah, that's pretty much it.
Guess going in a different direction here. What are the systems that are kind of not competitors to intents, but like what are the alternatives that people have used in the past? Like I know like AMMs obviously, but what are some of the other alternatives, and do you guys see like a future where kind of everything is intents? Is there still a place for non-intents based systems in the future, or does the entire Web3 space move to intents and 100% of interactions are intents based?
I think it's a very interesting question. I think that you can see how the traditional finance developed, and you can see that actually right now there's a very strong consensus to use audiobooks as the price discovery, and it works perfectly, I would say. So it's kind of a specific auction that works in a way that benefits all the parties, right? So exchanges as the organizers of the trading, they benefit because they got some trading volume, they got revenue from this. Market makers benefit because they have a lot of retail users using audiobooks, and they can also earn, some market makers in the US earn billions and billions of dollars every year because of this market structure, specific market structure. And it looks like that it doesn't really work on chain. So that's why we got the AMM in the first place, because audiobooks are really not efficient on the blockchain. And I think back to your question, is it the way to go? I think intents is just a way to come around actually this problem, and that's why we understood that with AMMs we cannot just simply express our intent as a transaction. So we have to make it more smooth, more wise way. And I think it all depends on where the blockchains are going. Are we going to the chains where we have low finality time, so it's really a quick blockchain that stamps a lot of blocks? Or are we gonna stick to the Ethereum model where we have blocks every once in a while, and we actually have to come around and make some magic happens behind the scenes to execute all these trades at the prices that actually are good for the users?
Yeah, I think as an alternative to what would you kind of propose? Maybe a integrated system, right? I think one of the main reasons intents really kind of came into the foray over the last year or so has been because of fragmentation and of course UX. But an alternative would be that you have a single computer integrated. Obviously, there are philosophical differences. I'm not saying that I'm for or against that as a solution. What I'm trying to say is that that's an alternative approach. And in an integrated system, the value of intents still exists, but it's not as apparent as you would in a relatively fragmented system like ETH. On the topic of kind of AMMs versus order books, I agree that faster block times kind of make up for a lot of the shortcomings that the AMM systems have, and I do have a philosophical inclination towards making sure that this vision of passive liquidity provision is a viable path forward, and we don't need specialized market makers that operate off chain to kind of provide a sufficient enough infrastructure for any financial activity, so to speak.
That is a good segue into what I was going to ask next. And this pertains to solvers, so might be a question for Propellerheads. With systems like CowSwap or Uniswap X, I think we've seen kind of an advancement from when they first launched, where the solvers were effectively like really advanced route finders, to the solvers evolving into these like advanced like capital providers, market makers.
Have they?
I don't know. Maybe you can give your perspective on that. From my perspective, it seems like the top two entities are effectively providing their own inventory, even for single chain, and they're winning a lot of volume. So, yeah, what do you think about that?
I don't think that's true. So, you check your Dune dashboards for, let's say, CowSwap. You look at the leaderboard and you see how solvers are ranked. The top three solvers, there are a few in there that have no inventory and are still just purely focusing on routing as one aspect. And then the second thing is obviously building healthy batches by like having multi-dimensional cows. So at least on the single chain side of things, you will have a lot of solvers that hold inventory. I don't want to name names, but there are solvers that have inventory and there are solvers that don't. And so far, it does not look like there is a very clear distinction that, a solver with inventory is very easily kind of beating solvers without inventory. So that hasn't happened on the single chain context. On multi-chain, because we don't have synchronous composability yet, only the solvers with inventory / market makers exist that provide the facility of like cross-chain swaps. So I would say that that's not necessarily true. And if you look at what's happening on chain, on single chain ecosystems, there is no clear kind of dominant path forward that, okay, you have inventory, that means you're going to beat out everybody else. That's not happening today.
Yeah, I'm glad to hear that from you, because I'm excited about the other case where kind of inventory-free solvers are dominating. Where are they sourcing the liquidity from? Is it primarily AMMs? It's just like super advanced AMM routing.
So as I said, like it's 3 liquidity sources. One's AMMs, then number 2 is RFQ providers, and number 3 is obviously in-flight liquidity. So in-flight liquidity is basically another trade going in the counter direction. A smart solver can figure out ways of, making a set of like P2P trades happen, not just between 2 traders, but maybe 3, 4, 5, 6. The bigger the ring, the more price efficient, the more capital efficient it is. And so these 3 are the key levers with, RFQs. Now the RFQ providers today, they are publicly accessible for any solver to kind of, plug into them. These RFQs themselves are quite competitive for market makers to give good quotes. So that kind of unlocks a certain specialization between, okay, there are these entities that are off-chain and are focusing on inventory management. They are supplying that liquidity through an RFQ API to a solver acting on chain. So between these 3 liquidity sources, there is a small, decent amount of room to be creative, and maybe you don't need inventory at that point.
Totally. Yeah, that makes sense. And then for cross-chain, like just because of the kind of non-atomic nature, like the solvers need inventory. Like they need to front capital. I don't know if do you guys know of any? Today they do. Yeah.
Yes.
Anything I say that's like, this is an absolute requirement, it has to work that way, will always be false. So do you know of any advancements, like any of you guys are, and just maybe more generally, like what are we most excited about in this like space within the space? What are the big things coming out in Intents that you guys want to highlight? We can start with anybody who wants to start.
Okay. I think one thing that I would be quite interested to see happen is these primitives that limit solvers having to maybe forget holding less inventory, but having no inventory. And I think an interesting direction are based rollups, because based rollups with the right kind of setup, you can have synchronous composability across multiple base rollups, which means that you can have a solver that's solving across multiple domains, has no inventory, and can still do it synchronously. So base rollups present an interesting world where composability is not that challenging. Along a similar tangent, you can have discussions around shared sequencers. I don't know what they are called today because there was apparently a narrative flush 6 months ago. But so those could be interesting because of the composability advantages that you get. And maybe 3 years down the line, we have real-time ZK proving that's fast enough where even if you don't share the same base layer, you can still have these no inventory requirements on solvers. So yeah, these are some interesting developments. And of course, there are some things that we are building which we are quite excited about. Open sourcing as much of the solver stack as possible because we believe that frees up a lot of time for a solver to now focus on the more creative and the more innovative things. That's how kind of even civilization has progressed, right? Like now you don't need to farm, so you can now go and figure out how the moon's working, right? So that's kind of the vision that we're working towards. That's what we're excited about. And yeah, that's pretty much it.
So building on Tanay's comment, you can call me a lunatic because I am the guy that's working on the moon features as opposed to the financial features. But the thing, just to answer your question, Mike, the thing that I'm most excited about right now is bringing more data from more sources on chain through various different Oracle mechanisms that we can bring intents to bear upon. And so, for example, we're working very closely with DIA Association. They're primarily known for their price feeds, but we're also bringing other non-financial information into the mix so that when users express intents for things other than just financial in nature, we can provide the logic that will actually support those kinds of transactions. And that's what gets me out of bed in the morning to tie my shoes. So,
for me personally, I think that we actually see a very good trend. First of all, if you check the how is the regular AMM set doing? So the major traffic the major flow is that is going through these AMMs is actually a toxic flow, that the arbitrage between taxes and access. And what excites me the most in the intent space is that real people are actually all using aggregators like CowSwap, like 1inch Fusion or Uniswap X. And what we see with this cycle is that more and more people coming in. And what I'm excited personally about something that Tanay touched slightly a bit earlier, that when you have enough people that are trading, you can have so many coincidences, not exactly direct coincidences, but coincidences that can be made in a completely weird way. So I'm excited because that's where the solvers are actually shine, and where we as the providers for this ecosystem is actually can help a lot. Because we've used to have a conversation before, our market makers, like you mentioned, the two biggest market makers on the CowSwap, like SCP and Wintermute, that are taking half of all the trades. So the thing was, people before was asking if the market maker is gonna take this market all. But I think going forward, and what excites me the most is that they won't be able, in my opinion, because of these complexities that actually only solvers who invest in this software, invest in this knowledge, can solve. And that's something that gives me energy to build more and to provide the tools for the solvers and for example, LP providers to benefit from this trading flow, this real flow that is coming from people who want to trade instead of the bots who actually ARP the taxes and DEXs.
Yeah, just one more thing that I would like to add is the lack of privacy throughout the trade supply chain that exists today. Use cases that leverage TEs or other similar technologies that can unlock privacy for the users to kind of not get exploited is a use case that I'm really, really excited about. It's a direction that we are building in as well. And yeah, I can probably talk about it in a few weeks, but that's the direction that we're also excited about, which is having privacy baked in for the user as a default. So yeah.
Nice. That's huge. And yeah, looking forward to hearing more about what you guys are doing there. Yeah, we have a few more minutes left, I think. So, wanted to dig into this kind of standardization for solvers and kind of like I think when you guys are talking about open sourcing solver stack or just creating more tools for solvers to let solvers kind of specialize beyond that. Yeah. What's the state of that today? So it seems like there are a few standards emerging. I don't know if you guys want to talk about any of those, but nothing that's really like we've all converged on. And solvers seem to be all kind of building their own infra, and protocols all have different interfaces. So how do you see that evolving, and like how much of this stuff gets evened out? Like, is it at the point where I'll be able to just like run an open source solver and make a few tweaks to like do my specialized thing? How close are we to that?
Man, I don't want to shill my book too hard, but so you mentioned standards and how protocols have different interfaces. Almost like 2 days ago, we haven't been as public about it yet, but we published a standard, ERC 7815. The discussion is now open in the forum, so anybody here who's kind of interested in what these standards are, how could DEXs standardize access to that liquidity through solvers, we'd love to kind of open the floor to feedback. If you have any ideas in that direction, if you're thinking, please feel free to reach out. We'd be happy to collaborate. So ERC 7815 is a standard which focuses on standardizing DEX interface access. Each DEX, like Curve, Balancer, Uniswap, the way they expose price data and liquidity data is unique. So each solver has to now adapt their infrastructure to match this, match these different interfaces. And a common shared standard is a win-win-win for everybody involved, the solvers, the DEXs, and the developers that are part of the entire chain. And then the second bit is, of course, you mentioned the open source aspect. Will you run an open source solver that kind of does your bidding based on a few tweaks? That's possible. And we expect to get there in like stages. So this open source tool that we released called Tychos, TYCHO, kind of solves for this at the indexing layer. But there are subsequent steps that we also have plans for. So there is indexing, then there is simulation, and then there is execution. And we have plans to kind of open source and kind of open up access to kind of all of the key contracts at these 3 layers. Make sure that they're audited so that there are no risk of user funds, and it's all kind of open for everybody to kind of give feedback to. So this will definitely be a community effort from our end. And once again, I just want to reinstate that if you are interested in kind of collaborating or sharing feedback, all doors are open, and we'd love to kind of hear what you think.
Few minutes left. Do you guys want to just say like any closing remarks on what we've talked about, or things you want to highlight with your projects, etc.?
Yeah, thank you. I think that we are really excited what's happening right now around the intents. I think that's exactly the way to go, especially for the EVM blockchains. And I think that that's cool that we see more and more projects coming in and building. Like we see a lot of solvers right now, especially on the CAO, for example. That's haven't been the case for many years, but like right now there are so many teams that are coming to CAO and actually want to actively solve. So I feel like the space is actually like booming right now. So yeah, really excited, and I really appreciate the efforts from the Propellerheads side to make things like more standardized, especially from the DEX side, because from our experiences, these guys are usually make some kind of different wired things, and you have to make them work. So it's a lot of effort on the solver side. So standardization is good, and it also excites me as well. So thanks for that, guys.
Yeah, just to build on that, I was really excited to hear about Propellerheads' proposed standard as well. So that'll be the first thing I check out at the conclusion of the talk. But in addition to that, I get just to shill a little bit. If anybody else is looking to get into the solver space, or if you have other data sets that you're interested in, we'd love to work with you at Randamu. That's something that we're very focused on. And so if there's any opportunity to collaborate, please do reach out to us. But thanks so much for having us.
I think I've shared plenty about what we do, so I wouldn't go on for a little bit longer. But I think, Mike, I would love to know more about Nomial.
Yeah, Mike,
know-
you haven't said anything about Nomial. What's
Oh,
going on?
nice. I get to shill Nomial before it's over. So Nomial, we're building inventory access. Primary use cases for solvers and specifically cross-chain solvers. So cross-chain solvers, as we mentioned before, have to front liquidity for all cross-chain trades. And usually front liquidity over some time window. So the aggregate of everything they're filling, they need to risk that capital for a certain amount of time. They get delayed repayment from a protocol like a cross after some window, like 3 to 4 hours. So they actually hold inventory on many chains. And if you think about like the capital requirement for that, as you support more chains, if you want to support up to like $1 million of volume on 20 chains, you actually need to hold $20 million, like total, like 1 million on each chain. So we are creating a system where passive liquidity providers can provide the liquidity so that solvers don't have to hold liquidity on multiple chains. They could hold in one place, and that gives them access to effectively borrow liquidity as needed from different chains. So it kind of moves their role to being like more advanced route finding entities. That's why I really like what you're saying about what's happening in single chain, where you don't necessarily need to be that high inventory, like combined market maker solver entity to win volume. We want to bring that same dynamic to cross chain. This would allow solvers to do kind of the hard work of participating in OFAs, finding like most optimal routes, gas optimization, etc. And then passive capital providers are providing the inventory through pools. They don't have to run all that solver infra. And we think this opens up a lot of interesting opportunities and ultimately like just makes the experience for users better in terms of like pricing, speed, scalability, everything. So that's my Nomial shill. Thanks for giving me that opportunity.
Of course, that's really interesting to hear. Like one question that I would have with that approach is, do you run into like scalability constraints, right? Like, okay, I see this being viable for 10 chains, 15 chains, 20, 30. So like, how do you think about scalability of this liquidity-based primitive when you are in a world with like, I don't know, a lot more chains than we have today?
That's a good question. I think, so if you look at it at the protocol level for inventory, like you still need to have inventory on every chain. But rather than the current model, which is all the solvers need to have that individually, if that gets pooled, then I think we get some efficiency gains from that, economies of scale effectively. Rebalancing is a big one. If you have every solver individually rebalancing, that's going to be a lot more expensive per solver than if you had the protocol rebalancing. And I think so. That's one thing. Another is I think there's a lot of passive capital that would want this opportunity because there are fees that solvers are making, and that is not really available to any passive capital holder right now. So I think opening this up to passive capital providers will just create a lot more liquidity, and rather than right now, if you're a passive capital provider, or if you hold capital but you don't want to run solver infra, or you don't want to build your own solver in-house, then you'd have to like partner with a solver. So that this kind of like takes that dynamic out, makes it more permissionless. So now you have any passive capital provider puts into a pool, they're providing capital. No off-chain agreements necessary.
I have a follow-up question to that, which is based on your description, it sounds like portfolio margin to me, based on how you described getting the passive liquidity pool set up. So is there a risk in the event that you have high volatility across these chains to some of those passive capital providers that they might get the equivalent of a margin call in that scenario?
The way that we plan to set it up, the solvers that borrow from the pools would be collateralized, so there is a liquidation process, and there would never be a point where the liquidity providers are not able to be made whole from that collateral. So, yeah.
That makes me feel better.
That's the ideal end state. So, yes. But I think we can wrap it up. We're a little over time. It was great moderating this panel with you guys.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank you
guys.
very much.